as well, so we could hear all the civil grand jury reports together.
Agenda item number 3 is a hearing on the recently published 2017-2018 Civil Grand Jury Report entitled Open Source Voting in San Francisco. Agenda item number 4 is a hearing on the recently published 2017-2018 Civil Grand Jury Report entitled Crisis Intervention, Bridging Police and Public Health.
Thank you so much. And for this next item, we have Grady Ward, who is presenting for the Civil Grand Jury on open source voting. We will have public comment on all 3 items together.
Hi, thank you so much, Supervisor Kim and Chairperson Kim and the rest of the supervisors. I just want to first start by thanking the rest of the committee that I worked with. This was not a production of myself alone, but of a really dedicated committee of 4 people who set out to understand this really complex issue. And our goal in this report was trying to dig past a lot of rhetoric and idealism and fear around open source voting, which tends to come attached with a lot of preconceived notions of what it means and what it would require. And thankfully, I think in doing this, we also kind of exposed some general principles of why projects that have support fail to gain traction. And I'm hoping today to focus on those principles so that we can, not only learn from this specific example, but hopefully, increase the effectiveness and efficiency of other projects inside the city as well. So we really found that this project had been in a relatively static state for about a decade. It had been in a hypothetical exploration with relatively broad support from city stakeholders, but hadn't gained significant momentum or traction, or really been established as an actual project out of a planned project or proposed project. The dominant 2 reasons for this were uncertainty and risk aversion. Uncertainty because there was not a clear project owner, because this project cuts across several layers of city governance and capability. It was also uncertain in that there was such great uncertainty around timeline, funding, and scope that there wasn't a reasonable path forward that could be approved or debated effectively. And the risk aversion piece of this is pretty obvious. Switching to a new election system is pretty dangerous if you are not confident that the election system, is totally flawless. And elections also kind of lend themselves to incredibly hard to develop software. They're incredibly infrequent. You don't get do-overs, you can't replay an election, and there's almost no tolerance for fault. So because of all of this, the Department of Elections was really hesitant to take on this project, and because of this kind of distribution of responsibility and experience, we saw that this project hadn't gained a lot of traction. So that's kind of the overview of what we found. Within that, there are a couple of common themes that I think we can look to and learn from the city as a whole, looking at any project. The first is that all projects need really clearly defined responsibility structures and need to have the experience of the city appropriately leveraged to mirror the, have the structure of city experience mirrored to best suit the project. The second piece is that outsourcing our decision-making is not an effective strategy. So there have been several independent reports, several consultant reports on whether or not we should pursue an open source voting system or what the realized costs and benefits of that would be. Those have generally been pretty inconclusive, and the reason for it is that at the heart of it, this is a question about balancing a broad set of priorities, not about whether or not something is technically feasible or is something or will cost an amount of dollars, right? And so we think that those are kind of the generic lessons we can hope to learn from this project. In terms of the responses that we got on this, the majority of responses were generally, agreeing with the overall sentiment of, requiring funding and direction. I think that there are obviously a lot of perspectives in this discussion and argument, and the majority of the responses point toward the fact that San Francisco is moving toward this and has taken on many of the steps that are requisite to actually making this project successful. So that ends my presentation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ward. We do, and I forgot to announce this at the beginning of the hearing, on behalf of the Elections Commission, we do have our Director, John Arts, as well as our Commission President, Roger Donaldson, and Chris Jordanak, the Chair of the Open Source Voting Technical Advisory Committee. And so, colleagues, if you have any questions for our department, also Department of Technology Director Lisa Gurl, and Controller's Office, Tonya Ledju, and Mark De La Rosa is also here to answer any questions on the open source voting system. All right, I'm seeing no questions for our departments. I'm going to ask that Rasha Harvey come up to present on behalf of the civil grand jury.
Hello, Chair Kim, Supervisors Peskin and Brown. I handed in a written response CAVA made to the civil grand jury, and I just want to thank all the supervisors and late Mayor Lee and current Mayor Breed for their support of the open source voting system. We at Open Voting Consortium and now more currently the California Association of Voting Officials are the pioneers of this open source election system work nationally, and as well as this project, and recognize switching to a new election technology takes time. It's not necessarily complicated to build out the system. There's precedent in New Hampshire, but if we're going to do it right, obviously we have to garner the political will. That's taken about 10 years, and now we're glad to see Linda Jarrell and the Department of Technology step in, and we can hopefully get started. This year's civil grand jury called me in to discuss the CAVA response, and the new grand jury accepted the information I presented, and I had some corrections to the report. It seemed to be basically founded in the Slalom report, and I've gone on record in front of the Election Commission to say that the Slalom report, we believe, was erroneous in a lot of ways. They didn't speak to the real pioneers, the real knowledgeable folks that have accomplished open source voting nationally, and we directed them to do so, but they did not. It is great news that we look like we're moving toward a general public license open source system now, and we recognize there's been 2 failed projects, one in Travis County, Texas, and one in Los Angeles. And with the Department of Technology now involved, we think we're going to avoid those pitfalls. Thank you again for your dedication to this issue and carrying it forward. Thank you.